Greetings, my name is Reginald Brown, a student at Liberty University. Welcome to my Interpersonal Communication Project for Human Services course number 508. As you move on to the next slide, I will further introduce myself. Everyone by now has heard the saying, you can't judge a book by its cover. That's especially true for me. Although I currently live in Northern California, I'm originally from what I call the greatest city in the world, Washington, D.C. I'm a Christian unapologetically, and I'm 40 years old. I'm taking this course to complete my second master's degree from Liberty University. I'm married to the former Felicia Terry, and between us we have two children, Ayana Regina and John Robert, both who graduated high school this year. Moving to the next slide, I'll tell you what makes me me. Growing up in Washington, D.C., I've always sought acceptance. I'm what I call one of 28, or as the book I'm looking at doing, 24 of 28, because my father has 28 children, and you can guess it, I'm number 24. From my mother, he has two. I have one brother who is 1 year and 19 days older than I. Early on, I was pretty much a good child. I was withdrawn unto myself because of fear of rejection. Because of being withdrawn, I became firm in what I believed and thought. As I grew older, I began to hang out with the wrong crowd, and I was forced to repeat the 10th grade. It was during my second year in the 10th grade, at the age of 15, that I accepted Christ as my Lord and personal Savior. Upon graduating high school, I immediately joined the Air Force, doing 4 years in active duty and then 6 years in the reserves. Currently, I have over 20 years in the preaching ministry. Before planning and pastoring Grace Community Church in Vacaville, California, I was an associate minister, spending 10 years as a children's church pastor and 5 years as the executive assistant to the pastor. I'm currently taking this course because up until about a couple years ago, I was a bivocational. Along with pastoring, I worked as a substance abuse counselor in custody for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. While there, I began to feel that most people felt that people who worked in the substance abuse environments were former drug users. Not only do I want to dispel this myth, I also want to help the hurting families. As we move to the next slide, I will share my overarching goal. During this course, I discovered I was a poor listener. Yes, I'm a poor listener, and it is due to my personal internal more than external barriers, which I will deal with later. So my overarching goal is to become a better listener by removing or overcoming my personal internal barriers. As we move to the next slide, I will share what enlarging the conversation means to me. On multiple occasions throughout the scriptures, the phrase, whosoever has ears to hear, let him hear, occurs. When I think of enlarging the conversation, I would define it as conversation that removes all barriers, opening dialogue between parties. This does not mean that everyone will agree, but what it does mean is that everyone will be heard. This will no doubt take some understanding and work on all parties, because as Burley Island notes, all hearing isn't listening, and listening is a skill that's learned and a mental process. As we move to the next slide, I will discuss behavioral blends. According to Dr. Carbonell, a behavioral blend is a unique temperament that helps us to describe an individual's personality. Even though the behavior blends are used to give insight into an individual, they cannot be placed in concrete because people are not clones. And in humanity, when it comes to personalities, it's not just black and white. There's so many shades in between. Moving on to the next slide, we're going to talk about the 4 temperaments or personality types. The 4 temperaments or personality types are known by its acronym, the DISC personality. In brief, D personality is active task-oriented, I personality is active people-oriented, S personality is passive people-oriented, while C personality is passive task-oriented. The next slide, I will demonstrate my personal temperament. According to the uniquely you personality profile, my personal behavior blend can be classified as IS or SI for both. This is said of me, and this is expected of me. When it comes to this is me, people with this personality blend are described as sensitive and inspirational. They do not like to hurt people's feelings and can be very influential. They need to be more task-oriented. They must learn to finish their work and do it well. They like to talk, but should pay more attention to the instructions. Not only does this describe me, this also describes this is expected of me. I must admit that I fought reading and hearing this because I looked at it as negative. This was until I sat and began to see the role my upbringing played in building and shaping my personality blend. Because I grew up desiring and searching for attention, I learned to gain acceptance that all I had to do was to make people feel good about themselves. Because of this, I've always had a lot of so-called friends, but also have learned to keep things inside. People are drawn to me naturally, not because I challenge them, but I make them feel secure. The problem is, this is a one-sided relationship, and I'm normally left to challenge what was said after they're gone to myself, and this can leave room for bitterness. Another challenge to this aspect of my personality is that it causes me to hold on to feelings and emotions. I feel them coming out at the wrong time, in the wrong way, and even to the wrong people. I do find joy in knowing that people in general like being around me and sharing their lives with me. My challenge is to use this natural proclivity of my personality to benefit the kingdom of God by using the information shared to help minister to them. In the next slide, I will define communication barrier. John Stewart defines communication as the continuous, complex, collaborative process of verbal and nonverbal meaning making. According to Burley Allen, communication is a skill that comes in multiple forms. On average, people communicate by writing 9% of the times, reading 16% of the times, talking 35% of the time, and listening 40% of the time. John Stewart called these barriers walls. If communication deals with the exchange of information from one party to another, communication barriers can be defined as anything that hinders or impedes the exchange of information from one party to another, whether internal or external. In the next slide, we're going to talk about my personal conversation barriers. Burley Allen addresses multiple barriers to communication. Out of the ones he addressed, I will deal with the three that I struggle with. The first barrier I struggle with is what Burley Allen called biased listening. Biased listening occurs when an opinion has been formed about the level of value of what is being said beforehand. I approach most conversations with this predisposition. Normally I try to gather the mental information before I even talk to the person because I do not like surprises. The second barrier is emotional listening. Over the years of my life, I've learned how to block out what I do not want to hear because I know how emotional I can get in some conversations. A good example of emotional listening for me would be when I talk to fathers who don't take care of their children because I've lost two children. One died at birth in 1994. The other died of kidney failure at 2 years of age in 1996. So I don't have much patience for fathers who don't take care of their children. And when talking to fathers, I can often come off harsh or even as if I didn't listen to what they had to say because of the feelings that were behind. So this is the challenge I have to deal with if I'm going to truly become a good listener. The last potential barrier to communication for me is external distractions. One of the things I've learned is that I'm easily distracted. I could be distracted by the conversation at the next table, a crying baby, people walking past, things going on in the distance, other people talking, competing for time, and many other things. As we move to the next slide, I'll discuss what I'm going to do to deal with my communication barriers. One of my greatest strengths is, I believe, in trying new things. To deal with my barriers, the first thing I'm going to do is to deal with my personal issues. Dealing with my personal issues will help me to clear the way to be able to communicate freely and openly with others. My goal is to become what James Peterson calls non-judgmental listener. To do this, I'm going to allow people to finish their full thought and communication process before responding. The barriers to communication can also be looked at as noise pollution, both internal and external. I know I have a lot of work to do to work through the barriers of pollution to truly become a better listener. Living in a state like California with all the rules and regulations to deal with air pollution, I know firsthand how difficult the task can be, but I also know how rewarding it is to be able to breathe fresh air. To deal with the barriers and pollution, I'm going to implement some of Burley Allen methods, such as work at listening, focus attention on ideas, taking meaningful notes after informing the person or party that I'll be doing so, asking meaningful questions, and I also utilize summarization. By taking these steps, I'll be able to force myself to stay on task. I will also be able to communicate better because I'll be truly listening to what the person has to say, giving them the opportunity to complete all of their thoughts. Moving on to the next slide, I will talk about how I will reach my overarching goal. My overarching goal is to become a better listener by removing or overcoming my personal internal barriers is very important to me. To reach these goals, I'm going to do the following steps. The first thing I'm going to do is to realize that Burley Allen's statement that listening is a learned skill is true and achievable. Coming to this realization will help me to understand the process of listening. It will also help me to understand that everyone does not communicate the same way, and that as a communicator, it is my responsibility to learn how they communicate and to be able to communicate in a language they can understand. Secondly, I'm going to understand my own unique personality blend as much as possible. By understanding my personality blend, I will understand more about my own communication style. I will also understand how to better use the strengths and weaknesses of this blend. Lastly, I will give myself opportunities to grow. By growing, I mean I will give myself opportunities to learn from my failures as well as my successes. By taking on this challenge, I will not only become a better listener, I will also become a better husband, son, father, friend, and minister, because of my level of communication affects the level of each of these relationships. Lastly, I'll become a better listener because my desire is to be in the class of whosoever have ears to hear, let him hear. Thank you.